The jeweler box was open. That was the first thing Nadia Masiko noticed when she returned from school that Tuesday evening. Her grandmother's carved wooden box sitting on the edge of the dressing table, its brass latch unhooked, its velvet interior exposed to the dying light coming through the curtains. She had not opened it. She never opened it carelessly. That box had been the last thing her grandmother pressed into her hands before the old woman closed her eyes for the final time, and Nadia had treated it with the reverence most people reserved for sacred texts. She crossed the bedroom slowly. Her school bag slid from her shoulder to the floor without her noticing. Her fingers touched the velvet lining, cool, smooth, and devastatingly empty. The gold was gone. Not misplaced. Not moved to a safer location.
Gone.
The full set, the necklace with the hand-engraved sunburst pattern, the matching earrings, and the wide cuff bracelet with her grandmother's initials pressed into the inner band. All of it. The pieces her grandmother had worn at every significant moment of her life. The pieces Nadia's mother Naomi had wept over when they were passed down. The pieces that carried 60 years of a woman's story in their weight and warmth. Nadia stood absolutely still. In the psychology of sudden loss, the mind performs a strange act of mercy. It delays comprehension. It makes a person check the same empty space 3 times, open drawers that have nothing to do with anything, call out a name into a silent house, as though the answer will fix what the eyes have already confirmed. Nadia did all of these things. She checked the box again. She opened the bedside drawer. She walked to the bathroom doorway and set her husband's name into the empty tiles. Kofi. Nothing came back but her own voice. And in that silence, something cold and ancient settled into her chest. Not yet understanding. Not yet accusation. Just the particular weight of a woman who senses, before she can prove anything, that the world she trusted has already shifted beneath her feet without permission. She sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, Port Harcourt hummed its usual evening noise, generators, distant music, the smell of suya smoke drifting through the louvers. Life continuing as though nothing irreversible had just happened inside this bedroom. But something had. And no one in that house would ever be the same again. Before we continue, let me ask you something quietly. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Some of us are hearing this story under the hot afternoon sun. Some in the calm of the night, when thoughts are heavy and hearts are open. Different places, one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this story reach another soul. Your comment tells me you understand the lesson. And when you share, you may be saving someone from the same mistake. Now, let us continue. Kofi Masiko was the kind of man who was easy to love at first and difficult to examine closely later. He had grown up in Port Harcourt's Remulla district, the only son of Maya Masiko, a retired jeweler trader who had built her small empire through discipline, market knowledge, and an almost supernatural ability to assess the value of things: gold, silver, people, promises. Maya had raised Kofi with high expectations wrapped in deep affection, and the combination had produced a man who was charming, socially confident, and quietly convinced that the world would always accommodate his needs if he smiled at it correctly. He had met Nadia 7 years ago at a colleague's wedding. She was a secondary school literature teacher, measured, thoughtful, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke and meant everything she said. Her background was modest. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother Naomi Ozes to raise her alone in a rented flat in Diobu. What Nadia lacked in material wealth she carried in character, and Kofi had been drawn to her steadiness the way restless water is drawn to a quiet shore. Their early marriage had been genuinely good. Not perfect, no marriages, but grounded. Nadia cooked on weekends and graded papers on weekday evenings. Kofi climbed steadily through the contracting firm where he worked, managing logistics for an oil services company, and they had built a decent life together in a modest duplex in Remulla, not far from where Maya still lived. The first warnings were not dramatic. They rarely are. Kofi began coming home later. Not dramatically later, just enough to shift the rhythm of their evenings. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter while he showered, migrated permanently to his trouser pocket. He started locking his car before entering the house, a habit Nadia noticed because he never used to bother. He became slightly kinder in a performing kind of way, bringing home food he knew she liked, commenting on her appearance unprompted, as though courtesy had become a management strategy rather than an instinct. Nadia noticed all of it. She was a literature teacher. Reading subtext was professional training. But she said nothing yet. In many African marriages, and especially in households shaped by the social weight of Port Harcourt's oil-class aspirations, a wife who speaks too soon is labeled suspicious, controlling, or insecure. Nadia understood the architecture of that trap clearly and chose instead to watch. What she could not have anticipated was the particular form the betrayal would take. 3 weeks before the jeweler box was found empty, Kofi had sat across from her at their kitchen table and mentioned, carefully, casually, that his contracting salary had been delayed by 2 months due to a client payment dispute. He needed 40,000 naira to cover a vehicle maintenance bill or risk losing a key delivery contract. His tone was measured. His eyes were steady. He looked exactly like a man telling the truth. Nadia had believed him. She had pulled money from the household reserve she managed. She had handed it over without drama or interrogation because that was the kind of wife she had chosen to be. Trusting, practical, not the kind to weaponize generosity. 2 weeks later, she found a petrol station receipt in his jacket pocket while sorting laundry. 12,000 naira of premium fuel. A station on ABA Road. On an evening he had told her he was working late in the office at Transamati. She placed the receipt on the kitchen counter. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it at the very bottom of her underwear drawer, not to use as ammunition, but because something in her body understood that she would need evidence before she was ready to speak. She was building a case, the way quiet people do. But the jeweler box would be empty before she ever finished building it. That evening, after she found the missing gold and sat on the edge of the bed listening to Port Harcourt breathe outside the window, Kofi came home at 9:15. He greeted her warmly. He asked about her day. He went to the bathroom and emerged smelling of their shared soap, and he lay down beside her as though the world was completely intact. Nadia said nothing, but her grandmother's empty box sat on the dressing table between them like a witness that had already seen everything. Nia Chukwuma was not a villain in her own story. This is important to establish, not as a defense, but as psychology. Because understanding how someone like Nia operates requires resisting the temptation to flatten her into simple wickedness. She was not wicked in the way that announces itself. She was something more familiar and therefore more dangerous, a woman shaped by scarcity who had decided, somewhere along the road of surviving it, that other people's boundaries were obstacles rather than truths. She was 29 years old, raised in Elekahia by a mother who had managed debt and dignity simultaneously after Nia's father abandoned a failing import business and the family attached to it. Nia had grown up watching her mother calculate every naira, every favor, every social connection assessed for its practical yield. It was not a cruel upbringing. It was simply a transactional one, and it had produced in Nia a woman who related to the world primarily through the question of what each situation could offer her if approached correctly. She had rebuilt herself through performance. A carefully curated Instagram presence, beach trips, designer accessories, restaurant meals, constructed a version of her life that was aspirational enough to attract brand partnerships and social invitations, while the studio apartment she actually lived in and the credit advances she relied on between paid collaborations remained completely invisible to her audience. She was beautiful in the specific way cameras reward: sharp cheekbones, deliberate style, a laugh she deployed like punctuation. She understood her own appeal without sentimentality. She had met Kofi 6 months ago at a business networking event in a hotel lobby on Stadium Road. Within 20 minutes of conversation, she had assessed him with the accuracy of someone who had spent years reading rooms. Oil sector contractor. Socially confident but emotionally hungry, the specific hunger of a man whose wife was steady and reliable and therefore, to a certain kind of man, slightly boring. He needed to feel exceptional. He needed someone to choose him with visible enthusiasm rather than quiet commitment. Nia understood this architecture immediately and began building inside it. Their arrangement deepened gradually. Dinners became weekends. Weekends became emotional dependency, almost entirely on Kofi's side, which Nia recognized, managed carefully, and never reciprocated beyond what was strategically useful. She was not in love with Kofi Masiko. She was in a negotiation with him, and she was the more clear-eyed party. By the 5th month, she had mapped his financial anxiety with precision. The contracting firm's payment delays were real. She had confirmed this through careful listening over several evenings. The social pressure he felt, as a man in his position surrounded by peers driving newer cars and building houses, was genuine and consuming. Kofi had never learned to carry financial vulnerability with dignity because no one had ever taught him that struggling quietly was not the same as failing permanently. Nia identified the gap and stepped into it. One evening in her apartment, the city noise bleeding through her window louvers, she sat across from him and spoke in the particular tone she reserved for practical suggestions, calm, reasonable, almost clinical. "You have resources, Kofi. You just don't think creatively about them." He frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means a man in your position doesn't need to be paralyzed by a payment delay. There are things sitting in your house right now that could solve this quietly. No bank processes. No loan arrangements. Just a simple conversion until you're back on your feet." She said it that smoothly. Conversion. As though reaching into your wife's inheritance was a financial instrument available to any resourceful person. Kofi went quiet. Nia watched his face move through the recognizable sequence, discomfort first, then the slow softening of rationalization, then the particular moral loosening that happens when a person has already decided they want to be persuaded and someone capable is providing the argument. She had watched that sequence on other faces. She knew precisely where it ended. "The gold," he said. His voice was low. Almost a question, but not quite. "She won't notice immediately. You replace it before it becomes an issue. Nobody suffers. It is temporary." These are the sentences that quietly dismantle lives, delivered softly, rationally, by someone who has reduced another woman's most sacred inheritance to a scheduling inconvenience. Nia did not shout it. She did not pressure him. She simply made the wrong thing sound like the obvious thing, which is a far more effective form of corruption than force ever manages to be. Kofi assembled the internal story that people who cross moral lines always construct, that the act was temporary, reversible, practically motivated. That Nadia's gold sat unused while real problems pressed. That a better replacement would arrive with the next contract payment. That no one would be permanently hurt. He took the gold 4 days later. Alone. In his own bedroom. With full knowledge of what he was doing. And he handed it to Nia that same evening, already feeling the corrupted relief of a man who has transferred both the moral weight and the practical burden onto someone else's hands. He did not know those hands were already reaching toward a buyer who would recognize every piece. Chidi Okafor had operated his private jewelry trading business from the same location in D-Line Market for 19 years. He was not a fence in the criminal sense. He asked no questions, yes, but he operated within the informal economy that most of Port Harcourt's middle class quietly relied upon. People sold inherited pieces when marriages dissolved, when businesses collapsed, when emergencies arrived without warning. Chidi received, assessed, and moved inventory with professional discretion. He had built his reputation on 2 things, fair pricing and absolute silence. He had known Maya Masiko for over 15 years. She had been one of his earliest serious clients during her trading years, and long after she retired, she remained his most trusted private buyer for significant pieces. Maya had the eye. Decades of handling gold had given her a knowledge of craftsmanship, hallmarks, and provenance that most certified appraisers would envy. When Chidi encountered something genuinely exceptional, he called her first. She paid well, and without negotiation drama. Nia arrived at Chidi's stall on a Wednesday morning dressed deliberately, not flashy enough to signal wealth, not casual enough to be dismissed. She had wrapped the gold in a soft cloth inside her handbag, and she presented it with the practiced composure of a woman conducting ordinary business. Chitty unwrapped the pieces slowly. His expression did not change, but his hands paused briefly on the cuff bracelet. He turned it, found the inner band, read the engraving. He examined the necklace's sunburst centerpiece, handworked, not cast, the kind of craftsmanship from a specific era and a specific tradition that you didn't encounter in mass production. He held the earrings up to his light. "These are significant pieces," he said. "Yes," Nia replied. "Family items. The owner needs to liquidate privately." Chitty nodded slowly. He named a figure. Nia countered. They settled. She left with the cash in 40 minutes. Chitty sat with the gold for the rest of that day. He served other customers. He ate his afternoon rice. And by evening, as was his practice with exceptional pieces, he photographed each item carefully and sent the images to his 3 most reliable private buyers with a simple message: quality set. Provenance unknown. First serious offer takes. Maya Masiko received the message at 7:15 that evening. She was sitting in her living room in Remula, the same house where she had raised Kofi, the same house where she still hosted Sunday family dinners and said grace with her eyes fully closed, when her phone lit up with Chitty's photographs. She opened the images. She expanded them. She looked at the necklace first. Then she stopped breathing for a moment. The sunburst engraving. She knew that pattern. She had been sitting 3 feet away from Nadia's grandmother when the old woman described commissioning those pieces from a craftsman in Owerri decades ago. She had been present at the gathering where those pieces were formally passed to Nadia. She had watched Naomi Oze's weep as she placed them in her daughter's hands, and she had thought then what beautiful weight a family carries in its objects. She knew the bracelet's inner engraving before she even enlarged that photograph. She knew what the initials would say. She sat in her living room for a long time. The television was on. A Nollywood drama was playing, people arguing over inheritance in a family compound, the usual themes, the usual betrayal. Maya stared past it. She was a woman of 71 years who had survived her husband's death, raised a son alone, built a business with her hands, and maintained her dignity through every season of difficulty. She was not a woman given to panic or theatrical response. She processed pain the way traders process bad transactions, quietly, completely, without waste. But this was her son's hands and her daughter-in-law's most sacred possession. She called Chitty back within 20 minutes. "I'll take the full set," she said. "I'll collect tomorrow morning. Hold them for me." She paid without bargaining. She collected the gold the next morning, placed it in her own jeweler cabinet, and sat with what she knew for exactly 48 hours, giving herself time, she would later explain, to be completely certain before she did what she had already decided to do. Then she called Naomi Oze's. Not Nadia. Not Kofi. Naomi. Because Maya understood something that the younger generation sometimes forgets, that in matters of this magnitude, you begin with the mothers. Naomi Oze's had lived with grief so long it had become a kind of companion. She had buried her husband at 43 and raised Nadia on a teacher's salary and stubborn love. She had watched her daughter grow into a careful, dignified woman and had felt, at Nadia's wedding 7 years ago, a specific maternal relief, the kind that comes when you believe your child has found safe harbor. She had placed her own mother's gold around her daughter's neck at that wedding and whispered the old woman's name like a blessing. When Maya Masiko called her on a Thursday evening and said, "Naomi, I need you to come to my house. I have something to show you and something to tell you, and neither of us should be alone when it happens," Naomi had understood from the texture of Maya's voice that something fundamental had broken. She arrived at Maya's house the following morning. Maya opened the door, embraced her, and led her to the sitting room without small talk. On the table between them sat the carved wooden box, Nadia's grandmother's box, which Maya had retrieved from Chitty along with the gold. The pieces were arranged inside it exactly as they had always been. Naomi saw the box and made a sound that was not quite a word. "Where?" she began and couldn't finish. "Kofi took them," Maya said. "He gave them to someone to sell. I was the buyer." The silence that followed was the kind that restructures rooms. Naomi sat with her hands in her lap for a long time. Maya sat across from her and said nothing more because there was wisdom in understanding when another person needs the full weight of a truth to settle before you add anything to it. Finally, Naomi said, "Does Nadia know?" Nadia knows the gold is gone. She doesn't know who took it or how it returned. And Kofi? Kofi knows nothing yet. Naomi looked up. What do we do? What they did was this. They planned carefully, deliberately, and together, two mothers bound not by blood but by the shared humiliation of watching their children's marriage become a site of cruelty. Maya called a Sunday family dinner. She invited Kofi and Nadia. She called her two sisters who had always been present at significant family moments. She told Kofi it was a routine Sunday gathering and mentioned she had a small announcement about her retirement savings that she wanted family present for. Kofi came, relaxed, unsuspecting. Nadia came with the hollow eyes of a woman who had been sleeping beside a stranger for weeks, present in body, already partially gone somewhere safer inside herself. The dinner proceeded normally through the first hour. Maya cooked jollof rice and fresh fish pepper soup. The sisters talked about a cousin's upcoming engagement. Kofi ate well and laughed at the right moments and was, in every visible way, a man completely at peace with himself. Then Maya rose from her chair. She left the dining room and returned carrying Nadia's grandmother's wooden jewelry box. She placed it in the center of the table. Nadia's face changed instantly, eyes flooding, hand going to her mouth. She recognized the box the way you recognize a parent's voice in a crowd. "Where?" she whispered. "I bought it," Maya said. "From a dealer in D-Line Market. 3 days ago." She looked at her son. "A young woman sold it to him on Wednesday morning." The table went completely quiet. Kofi's face did something complicated and terrible. The face of a man watching his constructed reality dissolve in public, in front of his mother, his wife, his aunts, and the woman who had just calmly dismantled every exit. "Mama, I can explain," he began. "No," Maya said. Her voice was not raised. "It did not need to be. You will listen." What followed was not a shouting match. It was something more devastating, a measured, precise account, delivered by a 71-year-old woman to her son in front of the people whose opinion he valued most. Maya told the table everything. Where she found the gold, what she paid, who had sold it. She named Nia Chukwuma, without flinching. Nadia wept without sound. Naomi, who had sat quietly at the corner of the table through all of it, reached across and placed Nadia's grandmother's bracelet onto her daughter's wrist without a word. The gesture broke something in that room that would never be repaired. Kofi looked at his mother and found no mercy in her face. Only the specific sorrow of a woman who had hoped better for her son and had been answered with this. There is a particular kind of justice that requires no courtroom. It requires only the right people in the right room, the truth spoken clearly, and the permanent alteration of how everyone present sees a man for the rest of his life. Port Harcourt's social fabric, especially within families shaped by Igbo tradition and the proud middle-class identity of the oil sector community, runs on reputation, on what the Annies know, on what is said at Sunday dinners for years afterward. Kofi had just been tried and convicted in the only court that would shape his actual daily existence. The dinner ended without resolution because there was no resolution available. There was only aftermath. Kofi drove home alone that night. Nadia had left with Naomi and would not return to the duplex for 11 days. During those 11 days, Kofi called her 17 times. She answered twice, both times briefly, practically, asking about a bill payment and a school errand. Her voice carried the particular flatness of a woman who has passed through the burning and come out the other side with scar tissue instead of wounds. Maya did not call Kofi at all during those 11 days. This, for him, was worse than any confrontation. His mother's silence was not the silence of someone processing, it was the silence of someone who had already processed and arrived at a position. He drove to her house on the 4th day. She opened the door, offered him water, sat across from him, and waited. "Mama, I want to explain properly." "I'm listening," he explained. He talked about the financial pressure, the delayed payments, the way it had spiraled, the way Nia had framed it as temporary. He talked for a long time, and Maya listened to every word with the full attention she had always given him. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Kofi, I am your mother. I have loved you without condition since before you could walk. But I want you to hear me now the way you should have heard your conscience before you touched that box. You did not steal from Nadia. You stole from her grandmother's grave. You reached back into a dead woman's hands and took what she left for her grandchild. There is no financial pressure on this earth that earns that act." Kofi wept. Not performed tears, real ones, the ugly weeping of a man who has been seen completely and found diminished. Maya did not move to comfort him. She let him cry because she understood that comfort in that moment would be its own kind of cruelty, the cruelty of softening a lesson that needed to remain sharp. "What do I do?" he asked finally. "That is now between you and Nadia. I am not a bridge for this." Nadia returned to the duplex on the 12th day. Not because she had forgiven him. Not because the marriage had been repaired. She returned to collect her things in an organized, dignified process that took 2 visits and a borrowed vehicle. She carried her grandmother's jewelry box in her hands on both trips, never in a bag, always in her hands, as though she needed to feel its weight against her palms to believe it was real. Their marriage ended without drama in a family mediation held at Maya's house 3 weeks later, with both mothers present and no raised voices. It ended the way marriages end when one person has done something unforgivable and the other person is simply too exhausted for anger, quietly, permanently, in the presence of witnesses who would remember exactly how it happened. Nia Chukwuma, when news reached her social circle, and it did, because Port Harcourt is large in geography and intimate in gossip, lost 2 brand partnerships within a month. Not through official scandal, but through the quiet withdrawal of people who had heard what she had done and made their own assessments. She did not respond publicly. There was nothing to say that would change what had already been understood. Kofi remained in the duplex. He paid the rent alone now. He attended Sunday dinners at his mother's house, and Maya received him because she was his mother and because she understood that love and accountability could coexist. But she seated him away from where Nadia's empty chair used to be, and that distance was never closed. The gold returned to Nadia's grandmother's box. The box returned to Nadia's dressing table, in her mother Naomi's flat in Diobu, where she stayed while she rebuilt. On difficult evenings, she would open the box and run her fingers across the sunburst engraving on the necklace, and she said, years later, that she was not thinking of Kofi when she did this. She was thinking of her grandmother, reclaiming the object for the story it was always supposed to carry. There is a weight to gold that has nothing to do with grams or market price. It is the weight of the hands that wore it, the years it witnessed, the love that passed it forward. When a man mistakes his wife's inheritance for a resource, he is not making a financial error. He is announcing, without words, what he truly believes she is worth. And the tragedy is not simply that he took the gold. The tragedy is that he carried it out of the house in a briefcase and felt relieved. The women in this story did not destroy Kofi Masiko. He had already done that before any of them spoke. What they did, Maya, Naomi, Nadia, was something quieter and more enduring. They refused to pretend. And in refusing to pretend, they returned to themselves something no man's weakness had the power to permanently take. Remember, the things we steal from people who trust us do not disappear. They find their way back. And when they do, they bring the full account with them. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.